Hello, my name is Peter Carter, and I've recently had the privilege of undertaking a Churchill Research Fellowship, and I'm pleased to share with you my story and some findings that I hope will be of interest. The subject of my research is understanding what international best practice looks like regarding national food traceability systems and policy. Given the very recent release of Australia's agricultural traceability strategy, I hope the observations and findings are helpful. My goal is to make traceability concepts as simple and as accessible as possible. If you've got time to read the full report, I'd welcome your feedback, and I'd be very pleased to discuss some of the findings and outcomes in person with you and your organisation if you like. This is a short overview, however, there's a bit to cover, so let's get moving. As mentioned, my research focuses on supply chain traceability. I've concentrated on food, beverages, and natural fibre, cotton, wool, and textiles. The report explores linkages between traceability of product, how product is identified, country of origin claims, the role of product conformity testing. The latter point, as we will cover later, is becoming increasingly important as environmental and sustainability credentials and claims are in the spotlight. So what's the question that I'm asking? How can we learn from other countries, and how can these learnings be applied to enhance our national traceability and trade systems? It's an honour to bring back to Australia some perspectives to help inform national discussion and policy developments impacting the simplification of trade systems and helping to achieve, and perhaps exceed, our $100 billion national agricultural production target by the year 2030. I find pictures can help. Here's a map of the journey that I took between March and May earlier this year. Before departing, I had the pleasure of meeting with a number of organisations, including the NFF, Australian Government Agricultural Ambassadors, and industry leaders. Singapore was my first stop, with a focus on digital trade systems. From there to Vietnam, and then on to the UK, Europe, and North America. With so many wonderful and generous people and personalities, it was a pleasure to learn and to share some of their stories. Sue McCluskey was one of those guides, and she asked me an important question before I left. What was going to be the common thread to bring this story home, to provide a consistent story about the observations across the countries that I visited? The approach that I took is described here on this slide and includes an answer to Sue's question. In each country I visited, I reached out to DFAT and agricultural counsellors. Working for a global organisation gave me the opportunity to connect with my GS1 peers abroad. Many went out of their way to orientate me and to help set up industry and government meetings. Where possible, I met with local accreditation bodies, counterpart organisations to NATA and JASANS in Australia. Lastly, I focused on connecting with people through markets, stores, restaurants, and on the street. Back to Sue's question, how could I string this story together? I adopted a standard approach, a consistent and simple lens as shown on the boxes on the right. In each country, I evaluated existing systems and processes against 4 leading food traceability practices. What national frameworks are in place to support traceability? What procedures are in place for record keeping? How is transparency and collaboration being managed? And finally, how is recall undertaken? Well, I'm not going to go through all of the analysis here. In my report, I provide a summary of strengths and limitations of national systems with a view to distill different approaches and consider what international best practice looks like. I will, however, shine a light on a few standout country observations. I've tried to summarise some of the key observations on one slide. No surprise, there is significant difference between the approaches and priorities taken. It's hard not to be impressed by the speed and the direction Singapore is taking with respect to digital trade. As a mature and vibrant economy, Singapore is setting something of a benchmark for others to follow, especially through the paperless exchange of trade credentials. Vietnam, a rapidly growing economy, has ambitious plans and reforms in progress, including the rollout of traceability systems across all 63 provinces. India has a strong technical capability and practical challenges supporting primary producers. There is much we can learn from the way that digital labelling capabilities are being developed to support enhanced traceability of agricultural inputs. In the UK, navigating post-Brexit complexities, including the resetting of new mutual trade recognition agreements for cross-border product flows, and with a new focus on food data transparency. I was in Brussels when the new deforestation initiative was ratified, something that will have enormous repercussions for upstream suppliers. Traceability capabilities will be critical to validate and verify country of origin and provenance claims for inputs. And we cannot underestimate the significance of decarbonisation efforts, not limited to the EU Green Deal and mechanisms such as digital product passports and the natural fibres and textile supply chain. Finally, North America is not waiting for the rest of the world, with the US FDA Food Safety Modernization Act and Canadian Trade Transparency Principles redefining the requirements for food safety and health. There's obviously much more to cover, but let me stress again, we cannot underestimate what's happening in Europe and the rest of the world regarding decarbonisation, greenhouse gas emission reduction, and realisation of global sustainable development goals. So what are some of the observations? What are some of the research outcomes? Well, there are 9 plus 1. I'll skim the surface of the analysis findings and invite you to dig a little deeper in the report if you like. Finding number 1, enhanced traceability measures are instrumental in addressing biosecurity threats, protecting agriculture and the environment, and creating a safer and more secure global food system. In the words of a famous management consultant, Peter Cart, you can't manage what you can't measure. Traceability requires consistent, unambiguous, and unique identification of products, places, as well as participants in global supply chains. Traceability is a critical enabler for the future, in whatever way we define it. Finding number 2. Collaboration and knowledge sharing is crucial for successful traceability initiatives, promoting transparency, integrity, and sustainability in the global food supply chain. Yes, this is perhaps an obvious one. However, even in Australia, there is still no place industry can go to discover what lessons have been learned from the last few years' investment in traceability projects. As an honest scientist will attest, progress is made by standing on the shoulders of giants, not by doing all the work yourself or doing it in your own way. Finding number 3 builds on the collaboration theme. Current global product conformity systems that underpin food health and safety, along with mutual trade recognition agreements, need to change. They're not broken, but they're not fit for the digital world that we live in. There needs to be a concerted national and international effort to digitalise national product conformity infrastructure. As noted in the findings, this digital transformation will be critical to maintain trust in trade, especially given the explosion of interest in ESG credentials and claims. And I'm pleased to say that Australia is very much out front when it comes to defining a positive pathway forward in this area. The 4th finding identifies an opportunity for more strategic focus on upstream traceability. Upstream traceability presents a strategic opportunity for Australia, an opportunity to inject higher quality information into food, beverage and fibre production systems. A practical example of this is making it easier for agricultural chemical or veterinary product users to capture and use product information. I encourage government and industry to concentrate on the beginning and perhaps the end of the spaghetti, or the fishing line if you prefer, with a view to untangling the traceability knots. We need simple and practical innovation that delivers demonstrable benefit for primary producers. I further stress the need to modernise and digitalise global product conformity systems in finding number 5. ESG claims and credentials management is not a new economic theory. It is, however, a honeypot for consultants, misdirected initiatives that treat sustainability aspects of production consumption systems as something different, something new. Government and industry need to collaborate to drive consistency in product conformity approaches and systems. We cannot treat ESG as its own bubble. I'm sure there will be much talk on this subject as we move forward. I sincerely hope that we don't see ESG become a new blockchain bubble or buzzline. I'm halfway there, so stick with me, please. In my report, I argue that the effectiveness of digital trade agreements and the adoption of supporting data standards are increasingly shaping country and industry competitiveness in an evolving digital trade landscape. I believe this position is completely consistent with Australia's government's national digital trade strategy. Now here I might upset a few people by saying there are some agencies and industries that don't especially care for existing supply chain traceability standards. I'm sure that statement might wake a few bears. Let me go on. Finding number 7 calls out the need for government leadership and a national approach to the adoption and use of digital trade standards. There is some wonderful work being done in this area, notably close to home and in Singapore. Regrettably, however, Australia is lagging, and this is reflected in digital maturity and our slipping in global rankings. We're currently significantly more difficult to do business with than we were 10 years ago, according to World Bank reports. Government leadership is vital regarding digital trade standards, and a lack of direction poses challenges to adopting standardised practices by industry. We need to treat supply chain and traceability standards as pre-competitive and prioritise their implementation to unlock economic growth and efficiency. Throughout my travel, I looked for comparative analysis frameworks to compare and contrast different national approaches to food traceability. Perhaps of little surprise, countries are not that forthcoming about system limitations or weaknesses. While there are useful data points, there's no single point of reference for inter-country comparison of metrics like foodborne illnesses or fatalities. Finding 8 calls out the need for an objective and technology-neutral framework for comparing and evaluating country approaches to supply chain traceability. Perhaps something of a byproduct of the research, the approach I took did naturally lend itself towards the development of a maturity model to compare national system capabilities. More on this in a minute. Now we're almost there. Finally, my analysis shines light on a different way to think about traceability and complex issues surrounding data access. Who gets to see my information? This is a simple issue in a one step up, one step backward traceability world. But what about end-to-end traceability? When did data become the focus? How did we lose our way? The UK and other countries are actively investigating traffic light indicators, or a signals-based approach to traceability. Traffic lights are green, everything's traceable. Amber, product's partially traceable, and red if it's not. Perhaps a key point here is that we need to keep things very simple. As I promised you, this is the last one. A byproduct of the research is a convenient comparative assessment framework. In the final section of the report, you will see a set of best practices, performance indicators, a comparative analysis framework, and a maturity model, with guidance notes to boot. And here's a quick view of the capability maturity framework for comparative analysis. As noted earlier, developing this framework was never an intention, and without a doubt, it requires more tuning and development. If it had not been for some wise advice from trusted guides like Sue and senior departmental executives, my approach might likely have been far less systematic. A standardized approach here has certainly made a difference. To close, I have many people to thank and acknowledge who helped me on my journey, starting with the Churchill trustees. I wish to call out Dr. Martin Cole and Anne MacDonald for their initial words of encouragement when I lodged my application back in 2019. Many others have been noted in my report. In the last slide of the pack, it's appropriate that I spend some time explaining, so what? What next? As I initially stated, my goal is to make supply chain and traceability concepts easily understandable for all stakeholders. I'm especially focused on those who have perhaps less access to knowledge needed to effectively participate in traceability discussions. Farmers and others that are not engaged will be left behind, and there is much work we need to do to address awareness and education. The next steps will involve debriefing sponsors and supporters, releasing findings and reports via social media, presenting and speaking, information sharing, industry action, public policy support. Any assistance you can provide to make this possible would be most welcome. My contact details are provided here, as well as a phone number. I hope this presentation has been helpful for you, and again, I thank the Churchill Trust for the opportunity.